Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is AzumangaDiohFan here, and since I've been really caught up in Pokemon Go as of late, I decided to do a commentary on a Pokemon-related video. And what better video to commentate on than Mystic Umbreon and the Aura Guardian's top 5 hardest Elite Four battles video. You know, if I'm being honest, this may be my first full-length commentary on a Poketuber to actually get past the scripting stage! Yay! Now, I'd like to thank a very special someone for suggesting this video. Who's this special someone, you may ask? Well, none other than Manga Comment, of course. And you know what? For this occasion, I'm gonna go ahead and use Vaporeon as my avatar for this commentary. Why Vaporeon? Well, next to Umbreon, it's my favorite evolution, and since Mystic's already using Umbreon to represent himself, this was my next best choice. So, without further ado, let's get this show on the road!
So as we all know, once we have cleared a specific region in the Pokemon world, and acquired 8 gym badges, we are then qualified to take on the Pokemon League Challenge. Once entered into the Pokemon League, the player must then take on 4 elite trainers who are believed to be the best trainers for that specific region. However, some of these Elite Four members give players more trouble than others, and some can be a total walk in the park. But we aren't here to distinguish the easy ones. We are here to talk about the top 5 Elite Four members that gave us the most trouble, and when I mean us, I have a special guest here to help me figure out who these members are.
Hey guys, Aura here, and as Mystic said, the Elite Four at times can be very challenging. They're basically harder versions of gym leaders. But which Elite Four members gave us the most trouble? Let's find out.
Okay, so I'm actually going to stop the video here because this is an issue that clearly needs to be addressed. The audio balancing between the actual segments themselves and the transitions is awful. So the actual segments are all like, and then the transitions are like, I mean, was that really the best way you could have balanced the audio? Now, this may seem like a minor issue to some people, but to me, I find it pretty annoying when I have to constantly adjust my volume throughout the video, so I can not only hear what these guys have to say, but also prevent myself from getting a goddamn headache. So from this point on, I'm actually gonna go ahead and fix the audio balancing. You're welcome!
Starting off at number 5, we have the Sinnoh-Psychic Master Lucien, who I can say gave me quite a bit of trouble with that irritating Bronzong he has, along with a few others. During the time of when Diamond and Pearl came out, I was about 12, and I could not for the life of me figure out what typing his Bronzong was, because it resisted so much. I finally figured Ground was a weakness, but then it had Levitate. Dark didn't work because Steel resisted it in generations 2 through 5. The same also applies for Ghost.
You seem to act as though this is the only time you encounter a Bronzong in Diamond and Pearl, when in fact there's evidence within the games themselves that calls this into question. For example, excluding Turnback Cave, which can only be accessed in the post-game, Bronzong can be found in the wild at Mount Cornet. Now before you say that there's only one location you can face Bronzong in the wild before the Elite Four, that being Mount Cornet, here's the thing. You can also meet its pre-evolution Bronzor in 2 other locations, one being Route 206 and the other being Wayward Cave. Considering that it has the same typing and the same naming style as its evolution, you'd still have a chance to face a Pokemon that's similar to Bronzong in the wild, and even then, you would still have to face a Bronzor in order to progress through the game anyway. Hello, Steel-type Gym Leader Byron! How are you on this fine day? So not only does the game give you plenty of exposure to the Pokemon's evolutionary line before the battle with Lucien, but it also gives you time to come up with counters for it. Now, let's just say for the sake of argument that you, for whatever reason, never came across a member of the Bronzor evolutionary line before you went to face the Elite Four. Even then, there are still quite a few hints given as to Bronzong's typing. For example, the word bronze is incorporated into its name, and since bronze is a type of metal, that would be a major clue to its steel typing. In addition to that, Bronzong is also shaped like a bell, and because bells are typically made out of a special metal that's a type of, you guessed it, bronze, this would be another clue to its steel typing. So, with all that in mind, this whole story about how you had trouble figuring out its typing seems a lot less credible now.
The only typing that was super effective was Fire, and even then, all the Fire Pokemon in the Sinnoh decks weren't that great, besides for Infernape and the Magmar line. That's bad, because not everyone starts off with Chimchar, and Magmar isn't around until the aftergame, and Rapidash, well, it isn't exactly the greatest.
Really? Because from what I've seen, Rapidash is a pretty decent fire-type Pokemon, even in Diamond and Pearl. For starters, not only does Rapidash have a pretty decent speed stat, but its physical attack stat's also quite decent. Not only that, but Rapidash gets access to Fire Blast and Flare Blitz via level up, as well as Flamethrower via TM, all of which get same type attack bonus. Wait, what's this? You don't want to wait until level 58 for Rapidash to learn Flare Blitz? No problem. You see, its pre-evolution Ponyta can learn Flare Blitz 10 levels earlier, so you can just have it hold the EXP share, which you can get at either Route 206 or the Jubilife TV Lottery Corner, and hold off on evolving it as soon as it gets to level 40. After that, keep holding the B button post-battle when it levels up until it gets to level 48 and learns Flare Blitz. Once you do that, have it evolve, and voila! You've just reduced the amount of grinding you have to do to have your Pokemon learn an awesome physical fire move. Oh, and it also gets access to Sunny Day via TM, which boosts the power of fire-type moves. In other words, it makes the moves I just talked about even more powerful. Now, while there still aren't a lot of fire types to choose from in Diamond and Pearl, those fire-type mons aren't your only options to get the job done. For example, you can catch Dialga or Palkia, depending on what version you're playing, before you go to face the Elite Four, who can both learn Sunny Day, Flamethrower, and Fire Blast via TM. Not only that, but you can also catch Azelf, who can learn Nasty Plot via Level Up, and, like Dialga and Palkia, can learn Sunny Day, Flamethrower, and Fire Blast via TM. And last but not least, there's the Cranidos line, who have access to the ability Mold Breaker, which ignores the effects of abilities such as Levitate that could potentially affect the damage or effects of a move that its user executes. Given that Lucian's Bronzong would have its ability negated by the Cranidos line's ability, and factoring in the line's high attack stat and access to ground-type moves like Earthquake, that Bronzong is gonna get wiped out no sweat.
Other than Lucian's Bronzong though, his team wasn't all that hard besides his Medicham with all the elemental punches, which gave Lucien a great amount of variety, able to cover almost any Pokemon besides fire.
And we're just gonna forget about Girafarig, which you showed as an example of a Pokemon on Lucian's team you had trouble with. I mean, it's not like you spent a long time explaining why Medicham was difficult, so why not talk about Girafarig as well?
When making this list, I was curious to see what other people thought were some of the hardest Elite Four members, and one of the names that came up quite a lot, no surprise, is Lorelei from the Kanto Elite Four, mainly her yellow team. But the main Pokemon that people struggle with is her Lapras. Not only can this thing easily take hits, but it can paralyze you with Body Slam and confuse you with Confuse Ray. And as we all know, trying to use a move while paralyzed and confused sometimes seems impossible. The main weaknesses of her team are Rock, Grass, and Electric. The Rock and Grass types are covered thanks to Lorelei's team having Water and Ice moves at her disposal. The best shot of beating Lorelei is with, like I said, Electric moves, and most people in yellow will be using a Pikachu as their Electric type. But the problem is, Pikachu is not only pretty weak, meaning its attacks sometimes won't do enough, but Pikachu also can't take a hit. At all. Another popular electric type in Gen 1 is Zapdos, but Zapdos is weak to Ice, which most of Lorelei's team has. So to put it in short, Lorelei a lot of times can really be a pain.
I'm sorry, but isn't Jolteon also a popular choice for an electric type mon in Generation 1? I mean, if we're now talking about Generation 1 as a whole rather than just Yellow specifically, it seems rather baffling that Jolteon wasn't brought up, especially since it would be a good electric type to use against Lorelei. Why, you may ask? Well, for one thing, it's only weak to ground-type moves, and last time I checked, none of Lorelei's Pokemon both on her red and blue team, as well as her yellow team, are equipped with any ground-type moves. Not only that, but it also has access to both Thunderbolt and Thunder via TM, which gets same type attack bonus. Also, due to its high speed stat and the way the critical hit system is set up in Generation 1, you can bet that Jolteon is gonna land some critical hits, making these moves hit even harder. In other words, its electric-type moves can do some serious damage against most of her team, except for maybe Jinx. But even then, it can still counter Jinx due to the fact that it gets Pin Missile via Level Up, which is a Bug-type move, and Psychic-type mons are typically weak against those types of moves, even in Generation 1. And you know what? I'd go as far as to say that you don't even need to use an electric type to defeat Lorelei, because in Generation 1, you have access to Starmie, who's also a popular mon to have on a Generation 1 team, and it can do rather well against Lorelei. For one thing, it resists water, psychic, and ice-type moves, which are fairly common on both of her teams. Not only that, but, like Jolteon, it not only has access to Thunderbolt and Thunder via TM, but its speed stat is also quite good, thus guaranteeing that it'll get quite a few critical hits. On top of that, while its defenses aren't that bad, they can be enhanced thanks to Starmie having access to Reflect, which raises physical defense, and also having access to Light Screen through its pre-evolution Staryu, which raises its special stat.
So as most of you guys know, I did a video a while back on why there are no Dark-type gyms, and Exilian and I mentioned that it was because we feel that a Dark-type gym leader would use too dirty of tactics.
Despite the fact that Ghost-type gym leaders are a thing and have Pokemon that can use quote-unquote dirty tactics, but I digress.
Flint is the Fire-type Elite Four member of Sinnoh. Well, at least I think he is. In fact, let's take a look at his Diamond and Pearl team real quick. Rapidash? Alright. Infernape? Oh, that's awesome. Steelix? Okay. Lopunny? Weird. And Drifblim? What? What is this? This is not a fire team. This is 2/5 of a fire team.
Yeah, here's the thing about that. You see, this isn't the only time where these games throw you a curveball when it comes to someone's team setup. For example, there's Volkner's team in Diamond and Pearl. Not only do you face him before you get to the Elite Four, but only 2 out of the 4 Pokemon he has are electric types, which is the type he specializes in. Not only that, but Flint is also not the only Elite Four member whose team isn't fully comprised of the type they specialize in. Case in point, Karen and Bruno. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a look at Karen's teams first. For Generation 2, she has both a Vileplume and Gengar on her team, who aren't dark types and don't even know any dark type moves. And unlike Flint and Volkner, who didn't have enough mods of their type to work with in Diamond and Pearl, Karen had no excuse. I mean, she could have easily replaced her Vileplume and Gengar with 2 other dark type mons, one being Sneasel and the other being Tyranitar. And if you think that this problem gets fixed in the Generation 2 remakes, well, think again, because even in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, she still keeps that Vileplume and Gengar on her team. Her rematch team does consist entirely of Dark-type Mons, but that still doesn't negate the problems with her main team in the original games and their remakes. As for Bruno, he's also in the same boat in the sense that he too had enough Mons of his specialized type in his debut generation to make a full-fledged fighting team, yet decided to have 2 Onix instead of Mons like Poliwrath and Primeape. Oh, and on his Generation 2 team, still has an Onix, even though he could have easily replaced it with a Heracross, which gets access to Reversal via Level Up and Rock Smash via TM, and for the generation it was introduced in, it had a high special defense stat compared to some of the other available fighting type Mons. To top it all off, it gets Fury Cutter via TM and Mega Horn via Level Up. With Fury Cutter, it gets stronger the more hits it stacks up, and along with Mega Horn, gets same type attack bonus, and given Mega Horn's base 120 power, both moves act as great counters to Psychic type Mons. And unlike Karen, who had a rematch team entirely made up of dark type Mons in her debut generation's remakes, Bruno ain't so lucky. Instead of 2 Onix on his Fire Red and Leaf Green rematch team like he does on his main team, he now has 2 Steelixes, which aren't fighting type Mons and aren't equipped with any fighting type moves. So let me ask you this. How come Bruno and Karen get a pass, yet Flint over here gets thrown under the bus?
3 of his Pokemon have Sunny Day, including his Lopunny and, you'd never guess, his Steelix. Who the hell put Sunny Day on a Steelix? This halves the power of water moves, which also helps his Steelix out.
While this may be true, this can also easily backfire on Steelix, because here's the funny thing about Sunny Day. This move affects all Pokemon on the field, meaning that along with Steelix's fire moves, the power of your Pokemon's fire moves will also be boosted. In other words, since fire-type moves are super effective against steel types such as Steelix, that fire move can do some serious damage to it or even knock it out.
So for number 1, we have picked one of the oldest existing Elite Four members ever, Agatha. Agatha has by far given us the most trouble out of all the Elite Four members up to this point. However, she has 2 teams, being in Fire Red and Leaf Green, and of course the originals including Yellow. And that's exactly what team we are talking about, her Yellow team. Her remakes team can be troublesome too, but there are more types during this time of Generation 3 that can cover her team, especially having actual damaging ghost type attacks.
You know, after doing quite a bit of research, I'd argue that her main Fire Red and Leaf Green team is actually harder than her Yellow team. In Generation 1, most likely due to an error, Psychic-type Pokemon were actually immune to Ghost-type moves, meaning that if a Pokemon tried to use a Ghost-type move against a Psychic-type Mon, that move would do a grand total of 0 damage to that Psychic Mon. But from Generation 2 onwards, that was fixed and Psychic Mons became vulnerable to Ghost-type moves, thus allowing Ghost-type Pokemon to actually put up a fight against Psychic Mons. Poison types, which make up 100% of Agatha's Yellow and main Fire Red and Leaf Green team, were weak to Bug-type moves in Generation 1, but eventually became resistant to those types of moves. And unlike in Generation 1, where you could sweep 95% of her team with Ground-type moves, Generation 3 introduced abilities, and the Ghastly line was given the Levitate ability, which makes Pokemon who possess it immune to Ground-type moves. As a contrast to her Yellow team, where only her Golbat got immunity from Ground-type moves due to its part Flying typing, most of her main team in Fire Red and Leaf Green is immune to Ground-type moves, making the use of these moves against most of her team next to useless.
But now, back to her yellow team. Agatha has an Arbok on her team that has the move Wrap on it. A lot of you guys know that during Generation 1, Wrap became an attack that immobilizes the opponent's Pokemon, meaning it cannot attack until Wrap has ended. Not to mention her Arbok also has Glare, which can paralyze the player and can slow down the speed. This gives Arbok the opportunity to set up Wrap, if the effects of paralysis kick in. Her Arbok isn't the only problem though. She has other Pokemon with devious movesets very similar to Karen's team, and getting hit with one of these attacks can still be quite the nuisance. Her Arbok using a Wrap though, is by far one of the most annoying things that gave me trouble with Agatha, because of how broken it was in Generation 1.
I love how you gloss over Agatha's entire team to focus on one Pokemon that can easily be taken out by a faster Pokemon with access to Earthquake, such as Charizard and Nidoking, which you can get early on as a Charmander and Nidoran male. In other words, if the Pokemon using Earthquake is faster than her Arbok, not only will it get knocked out easily due to its fragility, but her Arbok won't even get a chance to use those moves on you. But what really makes this part stick out is the fact that throughout the video, you and Aura have focused on an Elite Four members team as a whole, as opposed to spending nearly an entire segment talking about one Pokemon. Hell, even in the Lucien segment, you still talk about other Pokemon on Lucien's team, albeit briefly, besides Bronzong.
These were the members we had the hardest time with. What members did you guys struggle with? Share with us in the comment section below. I also wanted to thank Aura Guardian for helping me tackle this list.
Thanks so much for featuring me on your channel, Mystic. We also did a collab over on my channel, where this time we talked about our picks for the 5 hardest champions in Pokemon, so be sure to stop by if you want to see more.
And that's pretty much all I'm going to cover with this video, so I'm just going to go ahead and move on to my final thoughts. Now, one of the major criticisms I have with this video is the fact that these two rarely interact. Oh, don't get me wrong, they do interact, but even then, those interactions are very brief and are only present at the very beginning and very end of the video, which means that for a good chunk of the time, they don't interact. You see, one of the things that can make a collaborative video so fun and entertaining to watch is seeing the interactions between the people involved, and when your collab barely has any of that, it kinda seems less fun and entertaining to watch. Another issue I have with this video is the fact that there were plenty of details that they could have brought up that would have helped their arguments, but for whatever reason chose not to include them. Along with the parts about Lucien's giraffe rig and Lorelei's team, there were some other areas that could have been elaborated on. For example, Mystic says that besides Lucien's Bronzong and Medicham, his team isn't all that hard, yet never gives us any details as to why. I mean, even if the explanation itself was brief, it would have at least given his argument a bit more meat. And finally, I feel that certain types of lists like this should address the elephant in the room, that being the player having the ability to train their Pokemon to be stronger, employing techniques to counter the Elite Four, and stocking up on lots of healing items such as potions, elixirs, full restores, etc., which can help the player get their team back on their feet should it start to crumble. However, aside from a couple parts in the video, I feel like this was ignored for a good chunk of the time. Well, that was quite the mouthful, wasn't it? Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about this video, so until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this has been AzumangaDiohFan signing off.